So interestingly, just in the last couple months or so, I've been browsing through some stacks of old magazines that I have up in one of my rec rooms at home, and I've been coming across these old Apple II and Apple IIgs magazines that were the things that I was doing right at the very start when id Software was formed. You know, I had just become sort of a PC programmer right when we were founding id Software, and it's amazing to go back and look at what things were like back then when adding 256 kilobytes to your machine was a big memory upgrade, and when you were counting all the cycles of the 16-bit instructions. So, I commonly go back and just stare in amazement at how much progress we've made. I mean, a lot of people, it's easy to just be kind of like the frog in the boiling pot where you don't notice how many things have changed. And to go back and look at how what we had to cram entire games into there are things that barely fit in an image or a thumbnail even of what we've got now. And it makes me smile. I can't help but go back and look at how I enjoyed the work that I was doing back then, kind of crafting these tiny little worlds out of tiny little bits of data. And it's grown by over a factor of 1 million, and there's almost nothing in the human experience that has that kind of growth rate, where we've grown 6, closing in on 7 orders of magnitude in the capabilities that we get to bring to bear. And I can remember things that I thought were sharp and clever and cutting edge back then, like figuring out how to scroll the EGA screens with wraparound tricks and stuff that made me proud of what I was doing then and enabled us to do things that nobody had done before on the platform. And here we are over 20 years later, and there's still that same thing going on, where I'm looking to find things that are novel ways to approach things that let us do things that nobody else is doing on the platforms that we're working on today. So while so much has changed, 6, 7 orders of magnitude, there's still a lot of that core element that's the same, that we're building these virtual worlds that people get to go and play in, and it builds a place that people want to go, and it's at its core, that's what the gaming has been about for us.
So back in '95, it was much different. We were a handful of people. I think we had maybe a dozen people at id. We were all young. No one was married. No one had kids. It was kind of the Wild West of video game creation. And the games, of course, took a much shorter amount of time to get done. But it was very exciting. I have fond memories of the past.
It's interesting in that while shareware was very much associated with what we were doing at id at the very beginning, if you got like the original guys there at the very beginning and Electronic Arts came up and said, hey, we want to publish your game, we probably would have jumped all over that. Shareware was sort of a backdoor way into the industry, where we were just a few guys starting off doing something that was, that was interesting and novel and set ourselves apart a little bit, but we weren't part of the mainstream companies there. We weren't Electronic Arts or even Origin Systems or some of the other companies that were kind of the significant publishers that we loved their games back then, but it was still kind of a different part of the industry than what we were in. And shareware, kind of pioneered by the Apogee model, was a really wonderful thing because it took away that large barrier to entry, where you didn't have to go and convince an executive that, at that time maybe it was only $1 million or something that it cost to build a game, a couple orders of magnitude down from what it goes for now, but still you didn't have to make that pitch. And I remember even before id, back when I was a teenager, I wrote up game design documents and I sent them into Electronic Arts and say, I want to write this game, I'm going to be a great game programmer, and of course I got some polite refusals from that. But the shareware model allowed us to go out and do something that turned out to be immediately profitable. And while at the time it wasn't like the sales numbers that you would get for a big EA title there, but it was great for us, a small number of guys, that allowed us to bootstrap, where id Software never had to take out a loan, we never had to take a publisher advance. We were able to kind of build things the way we wanted to there on our own responsibility. We were able to move from the first Commander Keen series to the second Commander Keen series to Wolfenstein to Doom and on and on and on. And that was really a good thing, because we see a lot of companies all through the entire history and up to today that that they're completely beholden to their publisher because it takes so much capital to build these big games. And that's one of the things that I think is really great about some of the alternate sides of the game development industry now, where you get iOS titles, you get the social games and web games, and these are things that are back there where a few guys can go off and just make their, put their idea out there, and if they get enough bites, then they can go ahead and extend it out and, grow into something huge and wonderful there. So the conventional game industry has continued to grow throughout all of this, and the AAA titles that we get today are things of wonder and awe. They are bigger and better than movies were until just recently, and it's wonderful what you do there, but it's also a long, arduous slog to go ahead and do that. You need to marshal an army of people, and that's a very different thing from what it was like when there was just a handful of us in a room making the game. So, things have evolved along a couple different paths, but the great thing is that there's a lot of different valid, viable directions in the industry right now, and some of them very much do have that flavor of 20 years ago. So I had been interested in 3D rendering since I was a teenager, trying to do line-drawn graphics on the Apple II, and I had been waiting and pushing for the ability to make games like that. We knew it should be possible. There were the early inklings with Battlezone and iRobot and a few arcade games that sort of showed the baseline aspects of what you could do with the 3D perspective there. And I was just waiting until I could figure out what set of trade-offs coupled with the advancing hardware would allow us to make the first game like that. And of course, we actually had 2 games before Wolfenstein that took the quarter steps along the way there, with Hover Tank, which had flat shaded walls but still sort of put you in that first-person shooter perspective, and then Catacombs 3D, which added the textured walls and began to get the look of Wolfenstein. And Wolfenstein was really a polish pass on what we had developed along those 2 sort of steps along the way. There's no doubt that people would be doing 3D games, and they were doing simulators, and 3D was used for flight simulators and tank simulators and stuff like that, but it always had this connotation of a simulator where it was more for the serious types of things on there. And the real kind of innovation that I thought that we brought to this was the sense that you could use this 3D technology for just a straight action arcade experience on there, where it didn't have to be this sort of highfalutin scientific simulation of reality, that you could use this perspective and get really good value out of it just for making something lots of fun. Not for training for your pilot certificate or something, but just something that would throw you into this virtual world, and you'd be able to experience things in a different way than you ever had before. And one of the things that I like to point out is that the early games with Wolfenstein 3D and Catacombs, they used almost exactly the same character AI as a 2D overhead view that I had made called Catacombs, which was basically sort of a gauntlet style game. And what was so interesting is that taking this exact same gameplay, if you look at it from the top down on here, you can clearly see that this is sort of an established top-down shooter, but the change in perspective made all the difference in the world. And it was clear from really early on that it had a much more powerful effect on people, where when you look at the top-down games, they can be cool and fun and you can be playing for a high score, but you're controlling your little icon down there. It's not you in the game. You're driving the little critter in the game. With the 3D first-person games on there, it puts you inside the game. And we had some memorable moments in the development when people would be playtesting the game and there would be the turn around a corner and there was something right in their face and they would literally fall out of their chair. And that was something that probably no other game had provided that level of experience before that. I mean, we're almost inured to it now with what we, expect out of games and see out of it, but at that time it really was something different, and we knew that it was going to be important from really early on there.
For me personally, the most memorable game from id is Wolfenstein 3D. That's the game that really got me personally hooked into PC gaming. That's before I was even working for the company. I was just a fan at the time, and I remember playing Wolf 3D just obsessively until I literally couldn't play anymore because I'm a little bit affected by motion sickness, and so just going up against every wall, trying to hit spacebar, trying to find the secrets, and getting motion sickness until literally I had to go lay down in the bed for an hour to recover so that I could get up and play the game more.
when I downloaded the original shareware version of Doom 1, I had no idea what id was. Heck, I didn't even play Wolfenstein. I remember very distinctly, I was in the very first area of Doom 1, and I was moving around, and I thought really that this was the whole demo, and I thought this was really neat. There's a doorway at the end of the hall in the first area, and at first I didn't realize that was the door. Finally I stumbled upon it, it opened, and it was the moment that my life changed. I knew then and there that this is what I wanted to do. There was so much behind that door. There was a world to explore, and then the fact that I could make my own levels, I felt that there was infinite possibilities. And really, it's that door opening in the very first room of Doom 1 that set me on the path that I've been on ever since.
When we moved on to Doom, when we got the additional level of visual fidelity on there, we crossed a very significant threshold where normal people could look at the game and be impressed by it. Because even up through Wolfenstein, games were very much an iconic thing that you had to sort of project yourself into and forgive it its flaws. But with Doom, we crossed this threshold where normal people that didn't care at all about games could look at that and kind of say, wow, that's pretty cool, and be sort of amazed by that aspect. So we knew that we were taking steps that were going to be important. And of course, they were lessons that everybody else could pick up, and it has been gratifying to see these genres be taken up and be relatively stable throughout the industry. And I think that, forever after, there will be first-person shooters, and I do kind of look at that with a little bit of fatherly pride. So the aspect of multiplayer was another thing that I had been wanting to push for as long as I'd been able to program. I remember, wiring up the little joypad serial cable that you could hack together on an Apple II. There's the fundamental coolness just to be typing something even on one system and have it transmitted across a wire and showing up on another system. And that was something that you could just tactily feel this was going to be really cool. And I played the early games on CompuServe and playing some of the different things that you could do on there. Even though they might be completely trivial on there, even text interactions and whatnot, you could still see the kernel of what's going to be amazing there. So once we had this 3D world, the whole idea, you've got a virtual world, it's you and the computer in there now, but of course you want to throw additional people in there. That's just the most obvious thing in the world. And we didn't have kind of the time on Wolfenstein, although, if I look back on it, maybe we could have hacked something in on there and still kind of done Deathmatch 0.5 in the Wolfenstein generation of things. With Doom, we knew from the beginning that, okay, we wanted to add lighting, floors, ceilings, freeform geometry on here, and we wanted to add multiplayer. And it's funny thinking back to that time before anyone outside of research university and universities knew about the internet on there. It was the time of null modem cables, eventually modems, and a few people had these LANs. You had the Novell protocols on there rather than UDP. And so we had, and again, this was back in the days of DOS extenders, we did not have the operating system services that we had now. So we wound up cobbling together this arrangement where you had a multiplayer loader that would set things up and then run the actual game itself on there. And I wound up doing all of that, learning about the serial line protocols, the modem interactions, and the IPX protocol stuff during Doom. And I do clearly remember the first time that I barely got things working on there, where I had the two computers and I'm kind of tapping the forward and backwards on one of them and watching the guy go back and forth. You turn over, you shoot the other guy, you fall down, your head's on the ground in Doom, but you still see his feet walking back and forth in front of you, taunting you. And it was a magical moment where it was clear that, oh, this is going to be so much fun. This is going to be great. And when we extended that in Quake to include UDP protocol, which allowed it to run almost by accident at the beginning over the internet. We did not have any real intentions of making internet play I didn't think that it would be significant at the beginning because so few people had kind of viable connections, but there were people that could start it up. We intended the UDP for play over a LAN, but you could start a game initially over the internet, and that did have its own sort of frisson of coolness there where, okay, that guy's in California, he's not in the office across the way from me there. And that did lead me to go ahead and put quite a bit of technical development into what became Quake World, and we rolled into a lot of the future projects there. But those were also some of the very fundamentally cool moments. So the technology licensing was something that happened almost by accident and against our wishes through all of this, where after Wolfenstein came out, we started having people pestering us, in my view, about wanting to license the technology. And I didn't want to be in that business of supporting other people with that. We did some early work and it was painful where we had to do a lot of hand-holding and support, and this was not what I signed up for. This was not what I wanted to be a game programmer for, to be kind of holding the hands of somebody else when I want to be writing new technology. I wanted to go ahead and take the next step on there, not support the previous step. But eventually it got to the point where people started coming up with significant enough money to us where we made, the early offers were almost, they were so slanted in our side. They were saying, okay, you pay us all this money, this royalty, you can have all of this, and we'll give you 8 hours of support. I will let you come and talk with me for a day, and other than that, you got to figure it out on your own because I really don't care. I don't want to be doing this. I want to be working on new code. And we wound up getting a number of people to do that. Initially through Doom, and then more through Quake and Quake 2, and eventually probably more than any others with the Quake 3 license on there. But it was still not something that the company was really behind. We were still trying to stay a small company. We had a lot of strong opinions about not wanting to bloat over the size that we saw people at other companies where they had a lot of trouble as they grew. They felt it ruined the character of the company, and we wanted to stay this smaller team. So we never hired anybody to manage technical support on any of this. But we still had a lot of fabulous games that were made with this technology. And while the archaeological evidence is buried very, very deep, it still does give me a little bit of pride to know that Valve's titles and the Call of Duty titles, they have their distant ancient roots in the Quake code that I wound up writing all those years ago. Certainly there's very little of the original bits left in there, but that was the foundation that they were built on. Of course, what happened after that was Epic started taking licensing really seriously, and they devoted significant resources to that market, and really they ate our lunch on there, and that was good for them. They picked a market, they put resources forward to address it, and we kind of went our own way, producing different technology and not pursuing the licensing. And that's, and I really don't have any regrets about that. It's clearly there was a large market there. Epic wanted to serve it well, and I really didn't. That wasn't what I wanted to be doing at that point, and it still isn't. So I don't have any real regrets over that.
So id Software every year has QuakeCon, and it is our big thank you party to our fans. And let me tell you, we have the best fans. QuakeCon has been around since '96, and one little neat bit of trivia about QuakeCon is that of every single id Software employee, I am the only one that's been to every single QuakeCon. Even John Carmack missed one QuakeCon 1 year. So I'm very proud of that. I remind people of that every time I'm asked. But QuakeCon is just exciting. I mean, we have thousands of our fans that follow us, and they're appreciative of the hard work that we do, and we're appreciative of their support. So really, QuakeCon is great for us, and it's great for our fans.
To isolate the most important accomplishment of the company into one thing is a tough thing for me, because I kind of go back into the Wayback Machine and I think more of like milestones across the years. And I think if there's anything that the company is like known for is really sort of advancing the technology for games and sort of leading by example along that, and then having the industry follow behind us. So maybe it's not one specific thing, but just sort of the notoriety of being able to do that and repeat it time and time again, I think probably is, if anything, is the hallmark of the company.
Well, one of the great things about id Software is that we are not afraid to take risks. In every game that we've made, people have always asked us, why are you doing X, Y, and Z? And probably one of the greatest examples of that is during development of Quake 3. Quake 3 was the first game that required a graphics card, not a software renderer. And people at the time thought, this is crazy. Not everyone has these fancy cards. You guys are so cutting edge. But it was hugely successful, and it paved the way for every game after that. Even the jump between Doom and Quake, people thought it was very risky to go to a truly 3D world, and between Quake 3 and Doom 3 with the new paradigm of low poly, high poly models. So every game that we've done, people have always asked us, ooh, that's a risk. And even in our newest game, Rage, is much different than we've done in the past, and people have said, ooh, that's a risk. But for us, our risks always pay off.
When I look back and sort of think about how I would do things differently, for one thing, it's something that I don't spend much time on. I'm really kind of a remarkably unsentimental person. I don't kind of think back about the good old days, because for me, the good old days are right now. But when I have to take, usually it's either an interviewer asking me a question about it, or in a case like with the mobile development, where I got to work on these low-power devices before the iPhones, when we're talking Java and Brew, and I got to kind of go revisit the technologies that I did 15 years ago on there. And it was great because I could go through and say, clearly, anything I did then, I can do a much better job at now. I'm a better programmer, I've got more scope, I'm wiser about the decisions that I make, and I can just go do a better job. So sure, anything that I did back then, I could do a better job now if I could transport myself back there. But it's also important to recognize that if we take a title like Doom, there was nothing that could be done to that would have made a large difference in the impact that it had. It really did sort of max out the impact that a title could have there. And while I could go back, I could make the graphics, 30% faster and allow these features that we didn't have there, and we could add new things to it, and the later levels would look better, it wouldn't have mattered. It would have been, here's a onesie twosie percentage difference in there. It was kind of a maxed out experience. I could make more substantial changes in some of the later games that could have, once we started getting real competition and we weren't just sort of standing alone way out ahead of everybody, there's things that I would change in the different titles to make them more competitive in various ways and to address things that different people did. But I don't look back at saying we made any huge blunders in anything. We picked some paths, we could have picked other paths that might have led to better outcomes, but given where we ended up, I have no regrets about any of those. Now, if we're starting a new company today, you couldn't do the same thing that id did, because we did go out and we put a stake further ahead than anybody else had on there. And in graphics technology, there's no way for a small team of people to go and do that now. There are too many smart people working in the field, and while innovations are still out there to be had, unfortunately, most of them will be things that take a large battleship of data creation to really take advantage of. So I don't think there's the opportunity for a smart young graphics programmer to go out and expect to found a new company by himself with his two best friends or something and have a similar trajectory to id. But on the other hand, there are probably even better opportunities in what we've got with mobile and social gaming and web games, and these are opportunities that just didn't exist back then. And the kind of the frictionless markets that you get with a lot of these things like the App Store, you don't have to be a business person to go set this up. You can just be a developer. You don't need your biz guy on there. You can go fill out the forms yourself and get it going. And the capabilities that we've got with like cloud computing to be able to set up massive multiplayer systems on there, and the success that many companies have there. I mean, it's worthwhile to make sure that you kind of recognize that a lot of the little companies doing social games may be dwarfing id Software in a lot of different aspects, and that's wonderful. I think that there are great opportunities. It is not there probably was a time, maybe 10 years ago, when it was grim to be a new entrant into the marketplace, where you had to, beg a contract from somebody to sort of get your foot into the door, and you didn't have this great growth path to going off onto your own and building new systems, and you had to kind of do what the big publishers wanted you to do there. And we have a lot of opportunities now that didn't exist then. So it was great in the early shareware days. There was probably a dip where the independent developers were really in a bit of a pinch, but now they have opportunities that they never had before. And we've already seen companies that just came out of nowhere and have been bigger successes than id Software. And again, it's great.
Well, id Software has a long history, from inventing first-person shooter, inventing deathmatch. Heck, we came up with the word deathmatch. To Quake, which I believe was more influential to the industry than even Doom was, with the multiplayer architecture and the client-server architecture as well. And then our engines. Like the Quake 3 engine has powered some of the biggest games in the industry. And throughout all this time, we have, of course, changed and evolved, but we've kept, the spirit of id intact. We are small. We try to keep a very, small attitude. Yes, we're growing in size, but it's the attitude and the personality. The guys in the core, the center of the company. We've been together for so long, and we know how to work well together. And we've had successes and some things that haven't gone as well, but we've always made AAA products. We always innovate, and now as we turn this corner away from the hardcore PC group to a more broad-based market with developing for the consoles, but staying true to the PC. I want people that have never played an id Software game to play Rage, our newest game. We have millions of people that, may not have had, top-end PC hardware in the past that have an Xbox, that have a PS3. And those are the people that we are looking to become new fans.
I think one of the things that sort of I've seen that's been just as amazing to see what John Carmack has done from generation to engine to game is his ability to adapt to a multi-platform development environment from purely focused on the PC has been something to where he's done with sort of equal ease and intelligence and brilliance in terms of what we can show on the PS3, 360, as well as the PC, and have all those games use the same technology, the same art across all the different platforms. And when you buy Rage, you're just buying Rage. You're not buying the good version on platform A, and it's the weaker version on whatever the other platform is. And for me, that's being able to maintain that going forward, that technology advantage, and still be able to deliver across the platforms, that's going to be a critical success point for us.
We finally made the decision several years ago that we needed to grow the company to handle multiple projects at once, that we needed to have this pipeline effect where we could have Rage and Doom 4 going, and eventually a Quake and a Wolfenstein, and doing those internally rather than having them done by other teams that, guys that we like, that we think do pretty good jobs on things, but they're not here, they're not id, they're not the people that originally created these things. So we had made this decision to start growing the company. We started staffing up for Rage, and then we wound up with the offer to become part of the ZeniMax family. It was unexpected at the time. We were really kind of like, ZeniMax? Who are they? It's like, okay, Bethesda we know, but we didn't really have this sense of the larger parent company there. But it's been over a year now since the acquisition, and it's been really great. As we were growing as a private company, even though all I wanted to do was sit down and program, as the president and technical director, there was this responsibility, this burden to say, okay, we need to be having our board of directors meetings, we need to be doing strategic planning, we have 90 employees or something, we need to be looking out for all of them and doing this. And it was drawing me somewhat away from the work that I really wanted to be doing. But in this, this last year, we have other people looking at all of those issues. We've got all of these partner companies that are sisters in the organization, and it's been really great for me. I've been able to concentrate on the things that I want to do, but being a part of the larger family has been it's been neat in a way that I wouldn't have really expected, where it had always been, when we were one product at a time, it was id against the world, and the world is really big, and no matter who you are and what you're doing, it starts to feel a little bit overwhelming there. But the last couple years, as we've gone to the ZeniMax sort of Christmas get-together, and we wind up looking at all the titles that are in development on there, it's given me this ability, or this opportunity that I've never had before, to sort of be cheering for other people's success, to be saying, well, we think that what we're doing is great, but, go Brink, go Hunted, all of the other titles that are being released, and to be able to talk with their developers in this completely, collegial environment and say, well, what you're doing here, you might try something else here, or what was your experience with this technique? And that's been really great, and I'm very much looking forward to the years ahead. We are winding up in what I think is going to be a real sweet spot for the technology sharing on here, where I don't want to be in this business of supporting 100 companies working with the technology, but working with a half dozen companies on there brings up some interesting opportunities to leverage the work that we're doing. It allows me to justify some technical directions that might not be acceptable if it was just for one project, but if we're leveraging it over 6 projects, then that can be a really good thing. It can let me do better things for the coding, and it's going to allow us to kind of work really closely with the exploitation of this technology, and allows me to justify work going off doing cutting-edge new research for the future. So I'm as excited now as I've ever been about the direction of the company, the technology that I'm working on, the games that we're making, and everything.
We're all just as excited to make games as we were in the past, and I think the future is very bright.
For the future, of course, our big focus is on Rage, and that's coming out this fall, and so that's what we're all focused on here. But looking in the sort of the crystal ball down the road, Doom is in development, obviously, and so that's something that we're going to look forward to a future release. We continue to grow the studio to look to explore the other IPs as well. So for Quake, Wolfenstein, Rage, Doom, those are 4 brands that we're very fond of here, that we anticipate working on and having an affiliation with as we go forward in the future. And I think the fans of those properties are going to be, their patience will be rewarded, let me say that.